författare, tillika gästtalare här på konferensen, är den iransk-amerikanske filosofen Reza Jorjani, tillika författaren av den nyutgivna boken Prometheus and Atlas. Det är en bok som i huvudsak beskriver förutsättningarna för en kommande vetenskaplig revolution, vilken skulle möjliggöra för civilisationen att transcendera det rådande kartesianska paradigmet genom en omstrukturering av samhället och politiken. Jason kallar detta för en prismatisk revolution som bland annat medför att den ofta marginaliserade och åsidosatta forskningen kring ockulta fenomen såsom klarseende och telekinesis, det vill säga förmågan att med tankens hjälp påverka materien över tid och rum, blir medvetet erkänd och föremål för intelligent uppmärksamhet. Please give author and Doctor of Philosophy Reza Jorjani a warm hand.
Okay, can you folks all the way in the back hear me? Okay. So I don't have to adjust this from Nordic height down to mine. All right, in that case I'll leave it where it is. So it's been a long day and it'll be a longer night. I'll cut the small talk. Occult Science and the Organic State. More than a century ago, the American philosopher and psychologist William James ventured his assessment that in the coming generation, serious empirical study of occult phenomena, customarily deemed to be supernatural, would yield the next great scientific revolution. This statement, made in 1909, came on the heels of the Darwinian Revolution and also, of course, had in hindsight the Copernican Revolution. Yet despite a mountain of quite compelling data, neither that generation in the early 20th century nor the following 2 or 3 generations of scientific researchers were able to effect this promised overturning of mechanistic materialism. Some saw Freudian psychology as having the potential to effect the third great reorientation in the structure of knowledge. However, defenders of the prevailing paradigm were able to easily dismiss concepts such as the unconscious and the uncanny, because Freud deliberately and duplicitously suppressed what his unpublished papers demonstrate that he considered the empirical key to these irreducibly psychical dimensions of existence. Preternatural abilities traditionally associated with the occult. He did so essentially because he was afraid that unlocking the capacity to cultivate telepathy and clairvoyance threatened to break down the barrier between those personalities that consciously constitute our social coexistence and the seething abyss of our unconscious thoughts, desires, and intentions. From the early days of psychology and parapsychology up to our own epoch, it has not been for the want of evidence that so-called psi phenomena, such as extrasensory perception and psychokinesis, have failed to garner mainstream recognition and institutional validation. It is because a scientific revolution occasioned by serious engagement with spectral phenomena would not mark just another shift in the structure of knowledge, but the dawn of self-consciousness with respect to the forces hitherto unconsciously projecting frameworks that model nature. Essentially, it would demand thinking out of any and all boxes. Such an upheaval in the structuring of knowledge may entail a transformation of scientific practice so radical that it has as its precondition the most revolutionary socio-political catastrophe in the history of any culture. The postmodern philosophical thesis of the inextricability of knowledge and power holds even more radically in the case of a scientific revolution that would not merely mark a shift to a new paradigm, but would essentially redefine our relationship to model building as a self-conscious one. That would obviate paradigm shifts through a ruthless pragmatism that employs different maps or models of reality for different purposes. The resistance to an overcoming of the Cartesian paradigm through psychical research has been exceptionally strong because, when taken on the whole, what psychical research reveals about nature is inherently resistant to any paradigm building that does not acknowledge itself as provisional and practical. Many psychical researchers have missed this forest for the trees. They have failed to recognize that their research opens up the ultimate epistemological abyss. Meanwhile, for all their talk about deconstruction, so-called postmodern philosophers are still unconsciously terrified by the prospect of finding that epistemic frameworks are really lacking any foundation, any principle of reality, capital R. Their increasingly absurd and narcissistic exercises in evading serious questions are a travesty to their intellectual inheritance from the man who first developed the concept of Abbau, or deconstruction, in his monumental 1927 magnum opus, Being and Time. Martin Heidegger is grudgingly recognized by nearly everyone in the continental tradition as the preeminent European thinker of the 20th century. There's hardly a single major continental European philosopher working in the last third of the 20th century that was not in some way indebted to the groundwork that Heidegger laid in the first two-thirds of it. All of them are Heidegger's bastard children. While Heidegger did not address the psychical explicitly, it actually plays an occult role in his thought that is central. In fact, the fundamental basis of all of the most revolutionary elements of Heidegger's thinking, his rediscovery of truth as disclosure rather than representation, his deconstruction of chronological time, and his insistence on the ontological priority of technology over theoretical science, are all outgrowths of having taken occult phenomena like clairvoyance and precognition seriously. Postmodern philosophy is a perverted form of Heideggerianism, born of a traumatic response to the alleged moral failure of Heidegger's political philosophy. The organic conception of the state embraced by Heidegger is, however, just the kind of socio-political organization that would be needed if hitherto occulted human capacities were to become the subject of mainstream scientific research and development. Here's why that's the case. The psychic espionage program of the United States government, which was initially developed at the Stanford Research Institute with CIA funding and then later transferred to the Department of Defense, validated various forms of extrasensory perception at an operational level, producing actionable intelligence for decades. Remote viewers clairvoyantly mapped clandestine Soviet facilities. They were able to precognitively track the movement of hostages with a view to organizing rescue operations. Some even telepathically accessed the thoughts and emotions of designated targets such as Saddam Hussein in order to ascertain their intentions with a view to taking preemptive measures. Admitting the efficacy of such abilities so that training protocols could be widely disseminated and refined through competing mainstream research programs would have the following consequences. Your most intimate thoughts and emotions would in principle always be open to being telepathically accessed by others without your knowledge of this taking place. If you are part of a corporation working on innovative designs that are meant to be proprietary, these could be appropriated and patented by rivals before you have had a chance to fully develop them. Anything that you do in what you've hitherto taken to be the most private space, whether that's your bedroom or some classified military intelligence facility, would be open to the clairvoyant and undetectable surveillance of strangers. This is not only the end of personal privacy, it also utterly destroys the foundations of national security in state secrecy. Even if you don't consider yourself inclined to commit anything that could be construed as a criminal act, would you want to live in a society where people might be arrested in advance of committing crimes that have been precognitively viewed? What would having access to visions of the future do to individuals who would be able to see all of their future triumphs and tragedies in advance of their unfolding? Perhaps the tragedies could be averted, but would such foreknowledge also disrupt the course of action that would have led to the most awe-inspiring achievements in one's life? All of this pales in comparison to how terrifying the implications of psychokinesis are. In his capacity as Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Princeton University, Dr. Robert John amassed decades worth of data demonstrating with astronomical odds against chance that intention alone can affect mechanical systems, deviating them from their statistically average functioning if they are paid no mind. Perhaps being able to skew the digital output of a random number generator does not strike you as being so impressive. But the fact that John observed the same psychokinetic effect of intention in the case of macroscopic systems ought to be profoundly disturbing. First of all, even if the psychokinetic effect were limited to microscopic quantum systems, this would have significant implications with respect to the feasibility of designing quantum computers. It's already been noted that intense unconscious shifts in mental affect can disrupt sensitive microelectrical equipment, such as jet fighter cockpits or supercomputers. In fact, it is these gremlin effects that piqued John's interest in this line of research, given his background in military aeronautical engineering. Even if macro-level physical systems are vulnerable to psychokinesis, whether unconsciously intended or caused consciously, we have to reevaluate a whole body of data on physical mediumship from the early days of psychical research. No one has done more to carefully sift through these early studies of table tilting, hands-off instrument playing, ectoplasmic manifestations, levitations, and other dramatic demonstrations of mind over matter than Stephen E. Braude, former chair of the philosophy department at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and a past president of the Parapsychological Association. Braude points out that these effects of psychokinetic virtuosi have in some cases been observed under tightly controlled conditions by august scientists of the caliber of Sir William Crookes. If they are to be widely accepted as veridical, then we live in a world where it is indeed possible to kill with thought alone. Studies of direct mental interaction on living systems always focus on the potential for training people to be psychic healers of various diseases affecting the human organism. But the very same techniques of visualization and focused intention could produce first-rate psychic assassins. A world where psychokinesis has been accepted by mainstream science is one where all kinds of crimes could be untraceably committed at a distance with impunity. A liberal, democratic political order would be absolutely incapable of enduring such a situation. Not since witches were burned at the stake have we had a legal framework that even seriously considered such possibilities. For all their talk of deconstruction and alleged interest in what has been marginalized, postmodernists have diddled their time away playing innocuous language games completely irrelevant to the general public, while disregarding that fringe with the most potential to destabilize or even to completely destroy the orthodox establishment, the paranormal. By contrast, whatever exoteric means it adopted to gain ground among the masses and garner the support of wealthy industrialists, the entire National Socialist movement, spawned by the Atlantis Society, was from beginning to end an attempt at rebuilding civilization from out of the abyss opened up by a headlong scientific and political plunge into every dimension of the paranormal. The occultism of the National Socialist movement was foundational to its vision of recrafting the traditional worlds shattered by the instrumentalizing force of technology into a new world that is a total artwork of the kind that Friedrich Schelling envisioned when he elaborated his new alchemy, and of the kind that he feared might lead a race of titanic artistic geniuses to tyrannically rule over mere mortals. From the late 19th century through the middle of the 20th, Schelling's intuitions of the essentially supernatural power of art were legitimated by the esoteric core of fascism. In 1917 in Munich, Baron Rudolf von Sabotendorf founded the Thule Gesellschaft, or Atlantis Society. Sabotendorf was a student of the work of Guido von List, an occultist in turn influenced by the theosophist Lanz von Liebenfels. List and Liebenfels appropriated certain theosophical ideas of Blavatsky and Steiner and amalgamated them to German ultranationalism in order to forge Ariosophy, or Aryan wisdom. This was a biopolitical movement in the deepest sense. Its intention was to replace both the traditional dogmas of revealed religion and the outdated rationalistic Enlightenment concepts of liberal individualism with a new politics grounded on a vitalistic cultivation of the life force of evolution. This vitalism was both futuristic in its techno-scientism, as exemplified by eugenics, and also primordially pagan in its opposition to the degenerate ethos of Judeo-Christianity. It was, in a word, neo-pagan, or archaeo-futuristic. It concentrated and crystallized the eclectic New Age movement that was thriving in 1920s Weimar Germany as an antidote to the spiritual bankruptcy of materialism and rationalism. The members of the Thule Gesellschaft believed that Atlantis, or Thule, in the Germanic myths, was the lost homeland of the Nordic Atlantean master race, which had descended from the heavens. Initially a society for wealthy aristocrats with an interest in the occult, its largely secret membership included some of the foremost Germanic scientists of the day, such as Ernst Haeckel. They routinely met in luxurious rooms at the Four Seasons Hotel in Munich. In 1919, the group sought to compete with the increasing political influence of socialist and communist organizations by establishing its own workers' branch, the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. This public political action front, which met at beer taverns rather than at the posh hotel, later changed its name to the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. Adolf Hitler, who was then a corporal in the German army, was sent to spy on this workers' party on the suspicion that it might be a socialist organization. He quickly saw through its socialistic veneer to its martial and aristocratic occult underpinnings and joined the group himself, rising to be its charismatic leader. Although Hitler was still poor and hungry, a shabby embarrassment in the milieu of high society, one of the most prominent Thule occultists, the German poet Dietrich Eckart, saw a spark of genius in him. He took Hitler under his wing and introduced him to the elite of Munich society, connecting him to the movers and shakers of finance and industry in Bavaria, and helping him to secure foreign backing from European and American industrialists such as Henry Ford. On his deathbed, after Hitler's failed beer hall putsch of November 8th to 9th, 1923, Dietrich Eckart said, quote, "Hitler will dance, but it is I who play the tune. Do not mourn for me, for I will have influenced history more than any other German," unquote. Eckart was steeped in the Aryan philosophical tradition of India, and he tutored Hitler for long hours at his occult library. Adolf Hitler believed that the base matter of mundane reality could be melted down and willfully forged into a work of art based on a total Weltanschauung. The National Socialist Revolution was not just political, it was anthropological in its aim of using not only state power, but technique to reshape minds, bodies, and machines into a Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art. The term is often taken to be Wagnerian. The operas of Richard Wagner epitomize that brand of modernism that the National Socialists forwarded, with its mythic reimagining of the archaic past as a basis for a projection of the future. Even when recanting his youthful praise of Wagner as the rebirth of the Dionysian art that allows for the spirit's return to itself through the purifying power of myth, in the case of Wagner, Friedrich Nietzsche writes, quote, "Wagner sums up modernity, there's no way out, one must first become a Wagnerian," unquote. This is because Wagner aspired to synthesize all of the arts into a single master craft that expresses the mythic worldview of his society in a more total and all-encompassing way than had ever been possible in pre-modern times. As in the case of his artistic aspirations, Hitler was not alone in his occultism. Numerous members of Hitler's inner circle were avid practitioners of the black arts, most notably Heinrich Himmler, Rudolf Hess, Alfred Rosenberg, and Wilhelm Gutberlet. Among these, Himmler's esotericism far surpassed even that of Hitler. Together with Hermann Wirth and Walter Darre, Himmler founded the SS Ahnenerbe, whose full name in German translates as Research Society for the Primordial History of the Spirit. The SS was the most elite military-industrial institution in Nazi Germany, and the Ahnenerbe was its highest-level think tank. The organization's twofold purpose was, one, to launch archaeological and ethnographic expeditions in search of the Atlantean origin and worldwide influence of the Aryan race, and 2, scientific research into the paranormal with a view to weaponization of psychic abilities. The Ahnenerbe's most significant work was not in the research into the esoteric literature and pagan history of the Aryans, but in the practical development and use of paranormal abilities, especially with a view to military application. Here are just a few examples. The most secretive group within the Third Reich was that of 12 SS Gruppenführers selected by Himmler to sit at the round table in Wewelsburg Castle. During the course of an investigation of a German army general, the foreign intelligence chief, Walter Schellenberg, accidentally observed Himmler and the others at the round table sitting silently and in deep concentration. Apparently, Himmler had ordered them to exert their psychic influence on the general, who was being interrogated in a nearby room, so as to encourage him to tell the truth. The successful Allied invasion of Italy had led to the ouster of Mussolini by his own fascist Grand Council. He was subsequently arrested and was being held at an undisclosed location. Himmler sequestered practitioners of the occult sciences in a Wannsee country house, stocked with the best food, wine, and cigars, and tasked them to find Mussolini. This they did with pinpoint accuracy, despite the fact that Mussolini, who was being held on the island of Ponza, had no apparent contact with the outside world, and all conventional intelligence methods at the disposal of the Reich had come up empty. It appears that the 2 participants with paranormal abilities who contributed most to finding El Duce were a Dr. Wilhelm Gutberlet, a master of the sidereal pendulum and a confidant of Adolf Hitler, and the astrologer Wilhelm Wolff. On the basis of their information, Austrian-born Luftwaffe officer Otto Skorzeny led a team of Special Forces glider commandos to swoop down onto the roof of the building where Mussolini was being held and successfully extract him. He went on to lead the German Protectorate Republic of Salo. In the days before AWACS and satellites, it was very difficult for naval forces to accurately locate enemy warships. Himmler and his associates created a special department of the German Navy responsible for using every manner of paranormal research to track Allied convoys. The man in charge of this top-secret department, which was given the inscrutably vague name of Naval Research Institute, was Captain Hans A. Roeder, and under his command, psychics and astrologers worked together effectively with ballistic experts and astronomers to launch devastating U-boat attacks on otherwise undetectable British vessels. The project was launched after a test wherein the prospective paranormal adepts were shown photographs of the 2 most vital German naval assets whose locations were the most highly classified, the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen. The British Admiralty was obsessed with destroying these ships but could not find them. The team of occult practitioners did so from a room in a Berlin office building equipped with little more than their minds. And they did it with such an exactitude that even the staunchest skeptics in German naval intelligence had to consent to opening a department devoted to developing paranormal capabilities, if only so as not to fall behind any potential Allied efforts to discover the coordinates of German ships by such unorthodox means. The corporatism of fascism or National Socialism is ultimately a response to the extraordinary challenge of forging a socio-political order that could endure open recognition, research, and development of such occulted human abilities. It was not simply an economic system intended to encourage rapid industrial modernization while avoiding the ills of laissez-faire capitalism, such as high unemployment rates, mass poverty, and class conflict. Fascists claimed that their concept of the political was grounded in a scientific understanding of society as a single organism with vital interests of its own and an organic relationship to the individuals who are subsumed in its functional whole. This organic conception of the state, the Volkskörper, is integral to the blood and soil metaphor, the belief that everything with vital force is rooted in the earth. This really represents a different ontology altogether than the modern one that underlies less radical forms of neoliberal or conservative nationalism. In a speech delivered on January 27, 1934, Hitler gives us some insight into the corporatism of his movement. Quote, "My movement encompasses every aspect of the entire folk. It conceives of Germany as a corporate body, as a single organism. There is no such thing as non-responsibility in this organic being, not a single cell which is not responsible by its very existence for the welfare and well-being of the whole." Close quote. On the face of it, this vision of social organization manifested itself in images of the toned bodies of workers showering in new, hygienically built factories, and young people displaying their camaraderie and vitality on state-of-the-art sports grounds. It has a hidden source, however, in the need to foster total social cohesion and to neutralize any elements of society that harbor fractious ill will towards others, as a prerequisite to open development of psychical abilities that would render subconscious intent efficacious. Since the use of these abilities defies conventional methods of criminal investigation and prosecution, it would have to become impossible for one to even unconsciously conceive of committing a crime against one's fellows. To call such a society identitarian would be an understatement. Its mesmeric captivation by a collective ethos would be so deeply rooted that social order would be maintained not primarily by the deterrence of crime on account of the prospect of punishment, but on account of a profound implicit trust, more binding than the trust most people today place in their closest friends and family. In such a world, state security could no longer be based on secrecy, because there could no longer be any secrets or lies. It remains a question how we can bring such a society into being without compromising the worth of the individual, which is so uniquely valued by Indo-European cultures, and which to a great extent has fostered the daimonic genius of the Aryan world. A spectral revolution that legitimizes hitherto occulted science cannot take place without this shift to an organic state. This state must also integrate and transform modern technique in its very essence, so that the Volkskörper is also a Gesamtkunstwerk. However catastrophically they failed, these first postmodernists not only understood that the key to overcoming modernity lay in a psychical revolution in the sciences, but also that such a scientific revolution presupposes a political one. It cannot come about unless society has been radically reorganized into a hierarchically integrated organic state. Thank you very much.